The next important personality um, of early sociological history that we're going to talk about is Max Vabel, another German, and he suggested that, well, actually, he looked more at the idea of social action. Those people, the reasons why people would take action or react to sociological or societal changes. And again, looking at the data, he categorized the type of reactions into four main types. Okay, why people, according to society pressures, would pursue a particular behavior. Okay, why? There are four reasons. The four reasons are: number one, the traditional reason. Well, that's basically when people say, well, that's the way we always do it around here. The reason why we do it is because that's the way it's done. There are some places that do that because that's the way it's done, even though it's been being done like that for all of 3 or 4 years, but that's the way it's done. So that would be one reason why a person, the society is influencing a person to behave in a particular way. The second one, the second possibility, was what he called the affectional. Affect meaning emotional. So this time a person will do not because it's always done, but because he's overwhelmed with an emotional feeling. A soldier is given to his loyalty, or because of a murder because of revenge, or a love actions because of love. That would be the second one, the affectional. So we have the traditional, it's always been done this way. The affectional because of an emotional reason. Then there would be the value rational type, which means people go about doing these things because the goal itself is valued, or achieving the goal is valued as much as the goal itself. In other words, one does it because it's the proper thing to do, right? This is what I am going to do this because I would have to, in order for me to be a good person, this is what society says a good person does. I will return, I found a wallet with $100 in it, I will return it to the owner with the $100 in it. I want the money, but I also want to consider myself a good person. It's a code of conduct, a type of thing. Okay, which would not be the same if you're talking about a person who's working only on an instrumental rational level, which is the fourth type, an instrumental. In other words, the one is most efficient, right? The one that actually works best for me. So it's a result-oriented action. So in this sense, of course, maybe in that case I would have pocketed the cash and give back the wallet or who knows what. That's not what I personally would do, but nonetheless, that would be one of that. That would be, but in the context of the Industrial Revolution, of course, don't forget that we are talking about a societal change. Is that the value, the goal of making a profit is what forces or shapes the behavior of the industrialist, and so it doesn't make any difference how the workers are treated. Right, so that would work well with Marx's idea of conflict, but it's not because of the conflict. You see, it's nothing to do with the conflict. Because as far as Marx is concerned, there was a natural progression. Here, you would say that if it's best, if I will make more money by giving a little bit more to the workers, I'll do that because that will actually help me more. This sort of works a little bit more into the reality of what actually happened in history and what's happening today. But it's nonetheless, it was the idea of industrialization was not really the affective. It certainly wasn't when you're building something, it wasn't the traditional, although traditional has to do with it. And it's not the value rational. It was rather, it's the instrumental rational factors that affect and bring about the industrial change and the industrial revolution, or the changes which came about through the Industrial Revolution. And so that's Max Weber. There's a lot to talk about these people, and we're giving you just a quick tidbit. We do need to talk a little bit about W.E.B. DuBois and Jane Addams, and we'll talk about that. W.E.B. DuBois was actually the first black African-American sociologist. He grew up, he was born in 1868, so he was the children of slaves. He grew up and he passed away in 1963. And he focused on the African-American experience in America, and the African-American experience, the African experience itself. And he believed that this was, and he put within the framework of sociology the racial divide and the importance of that racial divide. He wrote about the strange meaning of being black, and that the African American needed to live a double consciousness. There's always the need to look at yourself through the eyes of others. You can't always 100% be yourself. So he believed, he would talk about, and he brought into the consciousness of the historical perspective of the Europeans making that divide by working to deplete Africa of its natural and human resources, which is something which, according to W.E.B. DuBois, was something going on until the modern times, or the postmodern times, although he didn't really live that long. He was a very controversial figure, by the way, because not really because of his racial studies, but he was also a very strong communist. Interestingly enough, that he was banned by the State Department to, his passport was taken away when he wanted to visit Europe. And many people would say that, it said that it was because he was an African American or black or Negro, whatever it was they said in those days. But in fact, at the same time, Louis Armstrong was sent to be a cultural ambassador for the United States. And the reason was because he was a very, very strong supporter of the Soviet regime, which was in the 1950s and 60s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, was actively pursuing enemy positions against the United States of America. So that was really one of the big problems that he had. And in the end, I think he actually moved out of the United States and went to Africa, and lived out his last years in Africa. And the last person who we're going to talk about at this particular junction is Jane Addams. A little bit earlier than, well, she was born in 1860, but she died in 1935. So she really was, in a sense, a lot. She was earlier than W.E.B. DuBois, and sort of and later than Max Vabel. And she founded something called, there's a little bit of question whether she was a sociologist or a social worker or whatever, but really important was that she was known for her bringing over from England to America the institution of the settlement houses. And the settlement houses, and we actually have some settlement houses still in New York City. She originally had the whole house in Chicago, where there were community centers, basically, that provided services for the poor and other marginalized populations. And she went, and she came from a wealthy background If you think about it, she was growing up in the late 1800s. She got a university degree. Couldn't do very much with it. A woman with a university degree just couldn't do very much, and she became a sociologist, and she went out and actually made her own profession. And at the whole house, they had things like night schools for adults and kindergarten classes for children, for boys and girls, kitchen, coffee house, all sorts of things they had there. So she was important from her was that she was probably the first strong voice for making sociology into a social structure, a social tool for social change and positive social change. She called this sympathetic knowledge, which means it's not good enough to be a academic. You have to go out in the field and understand people out in the field. You should have first-hand knowledge by living with the people. And this actually made a lot of sense, and it spawned a lot of research of people, of sociologists actually going out and learning how people living, learning exactly how people were living out in the actual world. So these are the people who we're going to cover. Let me just go over them again. We talked about Auguste Comte, Karl Marx, Emil Durkheim, and Max Weber, W.E.B. DuBois, and Jane Addams.